Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday. Okay, so Friday, we're having a great time. It's Friday, October 1st. Happy October, everybody. October 1st, 2021. Time to change the furnace filters, for one thing. I don't know. It should be like National Change Your Furnace Filter Day. It might be. I don't know. I imagine that the furniture or the furnace filter changing lobby is more on top of this than I am, but they would be professionally into that. So, you know, they got their eye on the ball all the time. I am distracted this morning by a bit of news. I had no idea I was going to cover it. I didn't know it was going to happen. I just happened to have seen on the way into the office, by which I mean turning the chair around and facing the computer so that we're ready to go with the show. Justice Brett Kavanaugh has COVID. Who knew? He's symptom-free, so good for him. But I saw the news and I thought, is this current news? Yeah, I mean, it was tweeted today. It says, Justice Kavanaugh tested positive for COVID-19 last night ahead of an investiture ceremony today for Justice Barrett. He had tested negative Monday, per the court. I guess they get a lot of tests there at the Supreme Court. And then I thought an investiture ceremony for Amy Coney, like she's a justice. What's the investiture thing all about? I don't know. And I guess it's, I don't know. I would have thought that would be something that would have taken place, last year or something like that. I'm just sort of curious about this. So I don't know. I'm going to click on a Google about it. But the investiture thing, I mean, does it? Do I really want to spend time reading about investiture ceremonies? When was Kavanaugh put on the court? I can't remember the date of it, but it says here the Supreme Court had a special sitting on November 8th, 2018 for the formal investiture ceremony of Brett Kavanaugh. I'm just curious as to why this wouldn't have happened for Barrett sometime earlier. Is it something that they do on the anniversary of your confirmation? Did they forget to do it? Did they not do it because of COVID? That would be ironic too. Also, Amy Coney Barrett turns out to be something of a typhoid Mary on COVID. Every time she has a public ceremony of some kind connected to her nomination or confirmation to the Supreme Court, people gather and get COVID. So I don't know. I'm not really sure why that's happening now. Let's see. A formal investiture ceremony for Barrett will take place at a special sitting. Maybe today was the first day they could deal with it. Today, yeah, Friday, 10 a.m., October 1st. Right in the middle of the show. How am I going to get there? Justice Barrett was sworn in on October 27th, 2020. The investiture is purely ceremonial and attendance is by invitation only. And you can't go if you have COVID. What else? It doesn't really say why it's happening almost a year later, but not on the anniversary day. I don't know. So I don't know what kind of ceremonial or what sort of traditions there are going along with this ceremony. It's never happened to me. I could ask around. If you happen to know, I guess you can tweet it to me and put the KITM hashtag on it so I stand some chance of seeing it. But it is weird. Every time people get together to mark the ascension of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, COVID gets passed around. I don't know if she has anything to do with it. Maybe she just has bad luck. Maybe there's just a pandemic and this disease is everywhere and there's really no method of avoiding it. And eventually, everyone's going to get it. Everyone will have a breakthrough infection. Justice Kavanaugh is fully vaccinated, they note in these stories as well. So that's not an issue. And that's good. It's nice to know that even the lunatics on the Supreme Court, nominated by the Republicans, nominated by Trump, the idiot, the Osama bin Laden of COVID, believe in the science enough to get themselves vaccinated. That would be a spectacularly dumb thing to do for the Republicans to lose their conservative majority in the court through anti-vaccination idiocy. They're not that dumb. They're willing to vaccinate those people. So here we go. This is not what I intended to talk about today. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. Bill knows it. You know it. I know it. The American people know it. Just like Bob Dole used to say. Is this the day that Kagro X wishes Jimmy Carter a happy 97th birthday after failing to do so for the last 97 years? I'm hopeful for this year. Truly. All right. It will be if it's his birthday. I guess that's kind of what you're saying here. So, all right. I mean, have we never? I don't know if I ever had the opportunity. No one ever reminded me. Jimmy Carter rarely spending any time around here at all. He seems healthy. Brett Kavanaugh, he likes beer. He's got COVID. Jimmy Carter, a sober guy and healthy at 97. So happy birthday. Hope you're enjoying your day. And probably out there building houses, as he usually does. So, okay. What does that mean? I mean, Bill, does this mean you stop listening to the show or something? Like we ended the 97-year dry spell, so you're out of here? Or does this make you a more faithful listener from here on in? It's all been a dry run, listening every single day up until today. Today was the inflection point. Okay, many things to catch up on. Like, I don't know, passing an infrastructure bill and then moving on to reconciliation. They didn't do it yesterday. Yesterday was the day they scheduled as the backup to not meeting the self-imposed deadline of September 27th. But as I think you came to expect if you've been listening to the show, Nancy Pelosi wasn't ready to put this thing on the floor without knowing the outcome. It is often said that Nancy Pelosi won't put a bill on the floor unless she knows she has the votes to pass it. It's probably better said, and will probably serve us better in explaining what might go on today when the infrastructure bill gets another shot at it. We'll see what happens. And we might be better off with the broader language of Nancy Pelosi doesn't like putting anything on the floor unless she knows what's going to happen to it. Now, usually she's interested in passing the thing, so it overlaps. The Venn diagram between Nancy Pelosi making decisions about putting bills on the floor only if she knows the outcome and Nancy Pelosi putting bills on the floor only if she's going to win, it pretty much overlaps. But sometimes there's possibly some value in demonstrating that a bill can't win. So there's some possibility, some pundits believed, that they might put the bill on the floor in order to, well, frankly, to give the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, which appears to be driving things, because, of course, well, without every Democratic vote, the margins will be very narrow. You'll have to depend on Republicans to pass the thing. There are a few who are willing to vote for it, but very few. So that's not where the margins are coming from. And if the Progressive Caucus holds out and says we were dead serious, you've got to have the reconciliation bill either in place or on a serious glide path to passage before we'll back the infrastructure bill. It might be time for them to demonstrate that that's real and they're going to do it and they're serious, and maybe you do bring the bill to the floor in order to show that that can happen. It doesn't kill the bill forever for it to lose a vote. You can turn right back around and get another one shortly through various procedural mechanisms. But we're not sure how valuable such a demonstration would be at this point, particularly if the speaker is willing to vouch for the fact that the votes aren't there. She may just say, look, I don't have to put it on the floor to know that the votes aren't there for it. That's my job, to count those votes beforehand. Well, it's Jim Clyburn's job to count the votes, but she'll be aware of that count and help count, of course. And so it's a rarity that she would put something on the floor knowing it was going to lose unless there was some other strategy behind it. So it's said that there will be a vote today, but we don't even know what today means, for one thing. Apparently she was asked just after midnight yesterday, close enough to midnight that people had forgotten that it might actually be past midnight. And people asked, so we're going to have this vote or what? And she said, yeah, we're going to have a vote today. But today was like literally today, not yesterday. And of course, there's a long 24-hour period before today runs out at the time that they ask her. And apparently they're monkeying around, playing those weird games that I mentioned were possible for holding open a legislative day for longer than a calendar day, too. And I'm not certain to whose advantage that operates at the moment. Well, I guess it operates to the advantage of Democrats because they're doing it. They may or may not have a real substantive reason for it. I've never really quite understood exactly what they were trying to do. Sometimes it helps, particularly in the Senate, with scheduling of things, where you say that you're going to handle something on a certain legislative day, or there are rules that this and that can or cannot happen on the same legislative day. And so you need to artificially extend the legislative day in order to make it in under the wire, or turn the page on a legislative day, even though the calendar day hasn't changed, in order to be able to bring up some new motion that has to wait a calendar day. You know how it goes. It's weird. All right, let's see. We'll continue on with the various other weird stories that I've packed away for you. I am still in the middle of negotiations with Eli Zupnik of the Fix the Senate coalition, although I keep forgetting, Fix Our Senate campaign, for having another Friday discussion about the filibuster, which once again figures prominently in everything. I thought about possibly having him on today, but then of course I let the negotiations go too late, like the Democrats, and in the House, and I only was able to get back to him at like almost midnight there too, and I thought, well, that seems like a rude thing to say. Yeah, you're on tomorrow at 9:30. He's up, he's working, he's doing other radio interviews, but I thought it best maybe we'll give it another week and see what develops in between now and then. But there was we had a little bit of opportunity earlier in the week to discuss the possibility of a strategic moment. I think that moment will still be there, but centering around the debt ceiling, the continuing Republican insistence on filibustering pretty much anything, on addressing the debt ceiling. It is their intention on the Republican side in the Senate and in the House, but this is their tool, the filibuster, to force Democrats alone to do the lifting necessary to find the votes necessary to pass a debt ceiling fix, whether that's a suspension of the debt ceiling or an increase in the number or whatever route they take. They don't want to have anything to do with it. It's a partisan thing that happens from time to time. And it used to be a bipartisan thing that they sort of did as a matter of course. In the last, 15 years or so, it's increasingly become something that the minority party says, well, let the majority party cast the votes for it. But very rarely, if ever, does anybody say, well, let them cast the votes for cloture on the thing, too. And if you don't have the 60 votes in your caucus, it becomes difficult, if not impossible to do, but also difficult, if not impossible, for whatever reason, to explain to the press corps and therefore on to the American people. And they're able to sit there, Republicans are, and say, well, we're not doing anything. We're not going to help. But if Democrats want to do it, they're the majority. Let them pass it, without mentioning that if they filibuster it, we need 10 of them in order, under the current rules, in order to even get to a vote on whatever it is we want to do about the debt ceiling. But you know that already, of course. The vast majority of the country does not, and that's unfortunate. Though I do understand that some of that is changing. We'll get to that in a minute, perhaps. But, they continue to filibuster. And my question is whether or not Manchin and Sinema would, if the situation sets up right and the vote is clean and clear enough, would they sit there and say, most important to me, more important than preventing the default of the United States federal government for the first time in history, and all the consequent disasters that might arise from it. More important to me is that time I said to the newspapers a couple of months ago that I did not support and would not support any changes in the filibuster rule. So, I mean, if it comes straight down to it and it's October 17th and we're facing that October 18th deadline for default and nothing's been done and Republicans are still saying we won't provide any votes for cloture on this thing and Democrats have to do it all by themselves, will anybody be able to talk Manchin and Sinema into even a small carve out and say, well, look, it's either default or some compromise on that thing you said to the newspapers once that you were so proud of? Could they get them to agree to a carve out for suspending, eliminating the filibuster on questions of addressing the debt ceiling? Whether, I guess you'd want to take care to write it both ways, that it could be either for raising the debt ceiling itself or for suspending the debt limit instead, just so there's no doubt. And, of course, if they manage to get them to do that and then they see that the world doesn't end, it opens up any number of possibilities for the future. And to say there's another thing that's a do or die, must pass thing that you agree is a must pass, and we need to carve out for that. And as you can see, you didn't get killed, you didn't burst into flames, God didn't strike you dead when you allowed this one small change to be made. Maybe you could make another. I don't know. Anyway, I mentioned that things were changing in terms of people knowing about or paying attention to procedure. And I noticed yesterday, and Greg sent it along, that's how I can find it. Greg also forwarded me this tweet from Dave Weigel, who noted this sort of extraordinary happening. Let's see. He's retweeting the tweet of Jessica Christian. Jessica Christian is a staff photojournalist with the San Francisco Chronicle, and her tweet, one of a series, is documenting a protest on the Golden Gate Bridge there in the San Francisco area. And, I don't know. How long is the thread? I might share the whole thread with you. There's video, though, so, you won't see the video, but she's describing protesters have blocked traffic on the Golden Gate Bridge to demand Congress grant a pathway to citizenship for the country's 11 million undocumented people. And, of course, we're familiar with that sort of activism on that particular issue. The group has invited speakers to talk about their experiences as undocumented immigrants and call on politicians to show up for immigrant families. A fleet of tow trucks has arrived to take away cars participating in the protest in support of undocumented immigrants. They're blocking, you see, passage across the Golden Gate Bridge. That's a major, bottleneck. The demonstration is over, she continues, and adds a little bit more video. But lots of activity on the northbound side as police try to figure out which cars are involved at the protest. That's funny. If you're just sitting there in traffic and you're annoyed at the whole thing, and then the cops tow your car because they think you're in on the protest. 2 people are being escorted by police for not cooperating or moving their cars. Southbound traffic has partially resumed. Traffic, she then says, now moving, but slowly but surely, the demonstration has ended. 2 people detained after being escorted. You get the idea. That wasn't the issue that Dave was interested in. I mean, he was interested in the issue. We're not saying he doesn't care about immigration. But what caught his eye was the video that Jessica provides of this demonstration, which I don't know whether it leads the march or this is just them blocking traffic. They're holding their banner across the lanes of traffic, and the banner reads, "Override the parliamentarian," which, as he notes, is interesting all by itself. He says, got to be the first override the parliamentarian banner in history. And then he says, parenthetically, I'm not making fun of this. The broad activist awareness of Congress's powers and hurdles is a huge difference between now and mid-2009. Why did he care about mid-2009? He goes on and tweets like, there was a whole stretch of 2009 when crazy lefties suggested passing the Affordable Care Act in budget reconciliation. The wise men of Washington, appropriately capitalized here, said this was crazy. Your average MSNBC liberal was like, LOL what? And that's a great point. like that is a huge difference between now and then. People actually know that you can change the filibuster rules by majority vote. People actually know that the parliamentarians' rulings, such as they are advisory only, and that a majority of the Senate can opt through various mechanisms not to accept the conclusion that the parliamentarian reaches, if they need that to be the case. And that was never really a part of citizen activism before. And essentially, what can I tell you? I accept this Lifetime Achievement Award on behalf of the blogging community and the crazy lefty bloggers and the dirty effing hippies everywhere. Thank you very much. I want to thank, all the people that you have to thank. I don't have producers in that respect, although I can thank the production staff here on the show for allowing me to waste my time and life to this point on this subject. There are now people blocking the Golden Gate Bridge, calling for overriding the parliamentarian in their parlance, and you're welcome, I guess, or an alternative formulation of this. Sorry, my bad. If you were caught in traffic on the Golden Gate Bridge last night, that was partly my doing. Sorry for teaching everybody how Congress works and what the Senate can and can't do, and how much deference to give senators when they say nothing can be done because the rules say blah, blah, blah. So we are where we are, and things have changed since 2009. And once again, thank you for this distinguished honor that comes with no accolades, recognition, money, free fried chicken, or discounts on Chevys or anything that I'm aware of, but or even a statuette, which would be nice at this point. But good job there in San Francisco. I have unleashed a monster, and sorry if you were caught in traffic, but I really think that's our doing there. Okay, let's see. Other fun things that we might consider. I haven't put a run sheet together for the day or anything. We're just going to take a look. As a matter of fact, Rebecca Roman's angling for the chief production role here too, with the KITM hashtag, has lots of suggestions always. There's let's see what's happening now. She's sending me a thread in which David Rothkopf dissects the media obsessive Dems in disarray narrative with cold hard facts. Well worth a read. That had my eye this morning from a different writer too. I happened to notice through I don't know what part of my feed sending along this tweet from Jeff Zeleny, who's the chief national affairs correspondent for CNN and probably knows better, but went with the narrative anyway. His tweet accompanying, well, nothing. Oh, yes, I guess talking about his report on CNN with Ryan Nobles and Manu Raju. No vote tonight, he was reporting last night, on the bipartisan infrastructure bill, my colleagues report, and mentioning Manu and Ryan. The latest sign, as he puts it, of deep divisions inside the Democratic Party that raise and answer even more questions about the party's ability to govern. And that seems like it's pretty crazy. I think I saw Jim Himes, Congressman Himes, saying this is a laughably terrible take. That might be how it landed in my Twitter feed. And yeah, I mean, it struck me as particularly annoying, given where we are with this. I mean, here's this CNN lead reporter saying, it's a Dems in disarray story, and it calls into question their ability to govern. Republicans at the moment filibustering on the debt ceiling purely for the lulls here. But Jeff's questions are about Democrats' ability to govern. They would send the country into default for nothing but the ability to say, look at how disorganized and ineffective Joe Biden is. He forgot. He's so senile. He forgot to raise the debt ceiling. They're blocking it, but Jeff wonders about the Democrats' ability to govern. And, it's defensible, and I'm sure he'll be running around saying, well, it's not that I don't think they don't know how to govern. It's just that, well, they can't get out of their own way. I mean, Manchin and Sinema are ostensibly Democrats. Why aren't they part of a united front? And therefore, why isn't the question already answered as to whether or not they can meet this challenge and therefore govern? But it seems like, well, it's more of the same old both sides. Both sides, everybody, something, or we're going to be equally critical of Democrats as we were about Republicans. But are we equally critical? I mean, here we have, can the Dems govern? I don't remember a whole lot of, there was a lot of evidence that we should have been asking, can Republicans govern? But they were rarely asked, except by us. Anyway, just noting for the record, Republicans filibustering the debt ceiling for the fun of it, but can the Dems govern? Republicans are protecting Trump, who doesn't believe in the peaceful transition of power through elections, lies about the election outcomes, extorts our allies overseas over military aid, as he did in Ukraine, foments domestic insurrection, as he did during what brought to his second impeachment. But again, Jeff's questions are about the Democrats' ability to govern. We're in the middle of a global pandemic entering like the second year of this pandemic, in which we're now rapidly approaching 750,000 Americans having been killed by COVID. Well over one in every 500 Americans already dead of COVID, and no real sign of the end of this thing, because Donald Trump pretty much decided, I don't know how to handle this, and besides, it's going to kill only Democrats in big cities anyway, which has been stood on its head, becomes the Osama bin Laden of COVID. But the questions are about Dems' ability to govern. I mean, they're allergic to governing over there. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. One direction we could take, in addition to, well, I guess in playing off of reminding everybody of the Osama bin Laden of COVID and the impact he's had on the country. Like I said, 1 in 500 dead due to his bungling. There's, let's see, new headlines. I know they're around here somewhere. There we go. I happen to have this one. I think this is an I thought this was reported by NBC News as well, but I guess somebody else picking up on the story here. Do I have the national NBC story on it somewhere? Anyway, I mean, the news is the news. We might as well just go ahead and read it. This version of it is what? KHN. What am I even looking at? KHN.org. Is that, where am I? KHN. Well, the story also ran in NBC News. It says right here. You can click over to there and do that. Then you know what you're looking at. What am I looking at? Isn't where everybody has moved all of their information about who are we on their websites to that little thing with the, I guess is supposed to be an icon that looks like a list. Anyway, does it really matter? I think the content of the story is the same in both places. Now I can't get that stupid menu out of my way. COVID is killing rural Americans at twice the rate of urbanites, by Lauren Weber. Now I'm curious about if I click on the NBC News story here, do I get the same headline? Oh no, they just send me to NBC News. So even worse. Okay, well I'll just tell you the content of our KHN take on this. Rural Americans are dying of COVID at more than twice the rate of their urban counterparts. A divide that health experts say is likely to widen as access to medical care shrinks for a population that tends to be older, sicker, heavier, poorer, and less vaccinated. Yes. And of course, at the time, at the beginning of the pandemic, rural residents basically were under the impression, and I think the Trump administration encouraged them in taking this position, that COVID-19 was, of course, we were being encouraged to do all the social distancing and, keep away from large crowds. And, naturally, I am sure they thought, well, in the big city, that's going to be a problem. But out here in God's country, in rural America, where you don't have to necessarily do anything special to have social distance between you and the nearest person, clearly, if that was what transmission was about, we weren't going to have that problem. But as it turns out, there's social interaction in rural America, too. Very weird. But of course, the story, the old background to the story of Jared Kushner convincing Donald Trump, and it probably wasn't very hard, that COVID would be a blue state killer only because it happened in crowded places. Cities, New York City, city folks just don't get it. They don't understand. Well, actually, only in this case, only city folks get it. And the rural people wouldn't get it. And for the first several months, that appeared to be the case because of the nature of the spread. And of course, where a virus that comes to us probably from overseas is going to land. It's going to land at the major ports of entry, not in the, backwaters of the country, though that's where, people might wander off to eventually. But guess what? The pan in pandemic explains the whole thing. And I mean, I guess if you're asking the question, what part of pandemic don't you people understand? I guess it was the pan part. There's a difference between an epidemic, lots of people have it, and a pandemic. Everybody is going to get it. And you guys keep saying you're the only real Americans. How could America really be affected by COVID unless you got it? You could have given that some sort of thought. Anyway, the cold hard facts of it, don't get into the politics of it. Here at KHN, or over at NBC News, presumably, while the initial surge of COVID-19 deaths skipped over much of rural America, they didn't skip over it. They didn't arrive. That's all. Where roughly 15% of Americans live, see, that's a lower number. Non-metropolitan mortality rates quickly started to outpace those of metropolitan areas as the virus spread nationwide before vaccinations became available, according to data from the Rural Policy Research Institute. Then, of course, even worse, vaccines did become widely available. And in the urban areas where sometimes the education level is higher and the impact was observed with everyone's own eyes. They could see up close and personally what the impact was, and they said, I'll get this vaccine. In rural America, they were, of course, also subject to a disinformation campaign that inclined them to ask questions like, well, they say it's a pandemic and the whole world is suffering from it, but I don't know anybody who has it, or it's not around here, and I don't know how it will get around here. Of course, one thing would be for everybody in the cities who are around COVID to get on their motorcycles and drive to Sturgis, South Dakota over the course of a week and then back. That'll do it. That's one reason these sort of things happen. And by the way, that was when it landed in the isolated northern tier heartland and never left, and scratching their head. How did this possibly happen? Oh my gosh. And of course, it lands in these places where they say things like, it would be fine if our hospital had one ICU bed because there's only 12 people in this state. So they weren't quite ready for that. And of course, the other thing is they also had the unfortunate circumstance, and maybe even if they had been responsible about things across the board, it might still have hit them hard because look, what's going to land in New York and California and to some extent other East and West Coast and some, I guess, international hubs in the middle of the country is going to be the initial novel coronavirus. And by the time the virus finds its way to the backwaters, well, it's Delta, the Delta variant by then, and it's more dangerous and more infectious and more deadly. And if you spent that time saying, city folks are going to be the ones that get this. We here in farmersonly.com land are never going to see this thing, and so therefore don't need the virus, and also I believe there's a tracking device in it, yada, 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 whatever crazy ideas they had for not getting it. And by the time they realized it was too late, not only was it too late, but it was Delta instead of the original Alpha strain. Or maybe there wasn't an Alpha strain. We're talking about the original strain and the first variant is Alpha. But whatever. Don't need to know the terminology. All we need to know is what lands there is Delta. All right, back to the story. See if there's anything else interesting to mine out of it. Since the pandemic began, about 1 in 434 rural Americans have died of COVID. They narrow it down. Compared to roughly 1 in 513 urban Americans. Now, on the whole, it's just under, under 1 in every 500 because we average it out. But look, there's almost a 100-person difference in that number. 1 in 434 rural Americans, 1 in 513 urban Americans. And though vaccines have reduced overall COVID death rates since the winter peak, rural mortality rates are now more than double urban rates and accelerating quickly. How does that happen? So there's a chart illustrating that it's happening. Next up, in rural northeastern Texas, Titus Regional Medical Center CEO Terry Scoggin is grappling with a 39% vaccination rate in his community. 11 patients died of COVID in the first half of September at his hospital in Mount Pleasant. Population 16,000, or I guess more accurately, population 15,989. Typically, 3 or 4 non-hospice patients die there in a whole month, but they had 11 in the first half of a month. We don't see death like that, Scoggin said. You usually don't see your friends and neighbors die. Well, about a year and a half ago, I remember telling them, if you guys aren't careful, it wasn't me, but if you guys aren't careful, you will see your friends and neighbors die. And they said, like, because they're country guys, pshaw, which is apparently what country people say to things like that. And, well, now they're burying them. Now it's time to invest in backhoe rental companies in rural America, if you want to make a quick buck off of this thing. Part of the problem is that COVID incidence rates in September were roughly 54% higher in rural areas than elsewhere. Why? Because, by the way, if you drive around in rural areas from time to time and stop, maybe you stop at the 7-Eleven to pick up something, the gas station convenience store, you will notice that they don't wear a lot of masks around there. Why don't they wear a lot of masks? Because we ain't crowded like city folk. There's no virus around here. If that virus showed up around here, why, I'd rev up my Chevy pickup truck with roll coal on it, and it would run away. And, yeah, well, it doesn't work like that. Okay, so what is it? Part of the problem, of course, COVID incidence rates 54% higher in rural areas than elsewhere, said Fred Ulrich, a University of Iowa College of Public Health research analyst who co-authored the Institute's report. He said the analysis compared the rates of non-metropolitan or rural areas and metropolitan or urban areas. Are you explaining to me? Are you just telling me what metropolitan and non-metropolitan mean? Wow. In 39 states, he added, rural counties had higher rates of COVID than their urban counterparts. That's a lot of states because we've only got 50. There's a national disconnect between perception and reality when it comes to COVID in rural America, said Alan Morgan, head of the National Rural Health Association, the NRHA. We've turned many rural communities into kill boxes. Well, that's a bad idea. And there's no movement towards addressing what we're seeing in many of these communities, either among the public or among governing officials. And that has to do, in part, I assume, with the local residents there saying there's no such thing as COVID. It's a hoax. The vaccines are dangerous. Masks make you breathe in carbon dioxide and therefore you will die. That was another of the fun things that landed in my inbox last night. This one, thanks to Patrick Snyder, sending me the note. Here's another COVID own goal from a pediatric nurse, although there's a little typo in here. Nurse is spelled N-U-T-S-E, like nutsy, which is really true, but a good typo, what do we say, a Freudian typo of sorts. He was sending me a Ron Filipkowski video. Diana Rathburn, who just died of COVID. She's here in this video giving a speech to the Lowell, Michigan School Board, in which she's saying, I have a printout of 47 studies that confirm the ineffectiveness of masks for COVID. She's an anti-masker. And the rest of her little speech is her expressing her deep concern that kids will get sick because masks, as you well know, and I have so many studies that show it, that builds up to, they have 3 to 5 times the level of carbon dioxide in their system as, is the acceptable safe levels. So she's very worried about the kids rebreathing their own carbon dioxide behind the masks. And in all the fretting, she died from COVID. So whoops. So as it turns out, the virus is more dangerous than carbon dioxide, and everybody knows it. And a nurse, most of all, should know it, because I bet you anything, she's got experience wearing medical masks and has seen doctors wearing medical masks. And they still, by the way, no answer from the anti-mask crowd about, oh my gosh, your oxygen levels, et cetera, et cetera. No answer as to how surgeons avoid passing out routinely during surgery. They keep asking them that, and they keep saying, I don't really know, but, and, well, here we are. And now we have 54% higher COVID incidence rates and higher death rates among the rural people who refuse to wear masks because we're protected by the natural space between us all. Well, still, the high incidence of cases and low vaccination rates don't fully capture why mortality rates are so much higher in rural areas than elsewhere. Academics and officials alike describe rural Americans' greater rates of poor health and their limited options for medical care as a deadly combination. True, we've been trying to solve that one too, but you guys keep saying, well, we're against wasteful spending and we don't like spending bills with T's in the words describing the number of dollars that you'll be spending. Can't you make it into a B and then we'll be happy, but dead? Maybe they should get off of that hobby horse. The pressures of the pandemic have compounded the problems by deepening staffing shortages at hospitals, creating cycles of worsening access to care. In the latest example of the deadly coronavirus wreaking more havoc in some communities than others, or it is the latest example, COVID has also killed Native Americans, Black, and Hispanic people at disproportionately high rates due to a lot of the same problems, but less of the anti-masking and anti-vaxxing among those groups. Vaccinations are the most effective way to prevent COVID infections from turning deadly. Roughly 41% of rural America was vaccinated as of September 23rd, compared with about 53% of urban America, according to analysis by the Daily Yonder, a newsroom covering rural America. Limited supplies and low access made shots hard to get in the far-flung regions at first, yeah. But officials and academics now blame vaccine hesitancy, misinformation, and politics for the low vaccination rates. Yup. That's country for you right there. I was just talking country. In hard-hit southwestern Missouri, for example, 26% of Newton County's residents were fully vaccinated as of September 27th. The health department has held raffles and vaccine clinics. What are they raffling? Advertised in the local newspaper, and even driven the vaccine to those lacking transportation in remote areas, according to Department Administrator Larry Bergner. But he said the interest in the shots typically increases only after someone dies or gets seriously ill within a hesitant person's social circle. Yeah. Additionally, the overload of COVID patients in hospitals has undermined a basic tenet of rural healthcare infrastructure, the capability to transfer patients out of rural hospitals to higher levels of specialty care at regional or urban health centers. We literally have email listservs of rural chief nursing officers or rural CEOs sending up an SOS to the group saying, we've called 60 or 70 hospitals and can't get this heart attack or stroke patient or surgical patient out, and they're going septic and they're going to die if it goes on much longer, said John Henderson, president and CEO of the Texas Organization of Rural and Community Hospitals. Morgan said he can't count how many people have talked to him about the transfer problem. It's just crazy. It's crazy and it's unacceptable, Morgan said. From what I'm seeing, that mortality gap is accelerating. And again, did it to ourselves for the most part. Well, why would we build bigger hospital capacity in rural areas? If we need it, let's not pay for it. If we need it, let's just move people from here to the big cities. where all of a sudden the big cities are valuable and important and interesting places to go because they'll save your life. And you don't need to have that capacity in the rural areas. And it, it makes a certain amount of sense. I don't know how expensive it would be to build and maintain such a network for low usage typically. But, but I'm just wondering, are all the people who are like, well, how come there's not enough capacity for me? How is it that you can how dare you tell me I can't go to the big city to have the medical treatment I need to save my life kind of thing? Are you guys all also well, you city slickers, you don't know where food comes from. You think it just arrives in packages and sits on the supermarket shelves, but there's farmers and rural folk behind the production of all this, and we should appreciate you, and we try to, and it's, we do our best, but of course you hate us for some reason, even when we want to give you vaccine. Well, the same applies in reverse to medicine. You country folks don't know where life-saving medicine comes from. It comes from the big cities. Not just picante sauce being made in New York City. Big medical advances that can save your life, even if you live in rural Missouri or Texas. But, to hell with the big cities. Let them die from COVID, right? Well, they did. They did die from COVID in surprising numbers. And then when you started to die from COVID, not because there weren't treatments or vaccines available, but because you either refused them or the level of care you needed, despite having been vaccinated, was higher than you were willing to pay for in your area. And guess what? You needed to go to the evil big city to have your life saved. You don't know where medicine comes from. Everybody has a problem. Both sides in recognizing who does what for whom. Access to medical care has long bedeviled swaths of rural America, the article notes. Since 2005, 181 rural hospitals have closed. Another problem. A 2020 KHN analysis found that more than half of U.S. counties, many of them largely rural, don't have a hospital with intensive care unit beds. Pre-pandemic, rural Americans had 20% higher overall death rates than those who live in urban areas due to their lower rates of insurance, higher rates of poverty, and more limited access to health care, according to 2019 data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's National Center for Health Statistics. In southeastern Missouri's Ripley County, the local hospital closed in 2018. As of September 27th, only 24% of residents were fully vaccinated against COVID. Due to a recent crush of cases, COVID patients are getting sent home from emergency rooms in surrounding counties if they're not, quote, severely bad, Health Department Director Tammy Cosgrove said. The nursing shortage hitting the county, or the country, is particularly dire in rural areas, which have less money than large hospitals to pay the exorbitant fees travel nursing agencies are demanding. And as nursing temp agencies offer hospital staffers more cash to join their teams, many rural nurses are jumping ship. One of Scoggins' nurses told him she had to take a travel job. She could pay off all her debt in 3 months with that kind of money. And by the way, people are able to find that money to pay them all of a sudden, and then they don't have to live with lifelong debt. Another weird choice we make in this country. And then there's the burnout of working over a year and a half through the pandemic. Audrey Snyder, the immediate past president of the Rural Nurse Organization, said she's lost count of how many nurses have told her they're quitting. Those resignations feed into a relentless cycle. As travel nurse companies attract more nurses, the nurses left behind shouldering the work become more burned out and eventually quit. While this is true at hospitals of all types, the effect in hard-to-staff rural hospitals can be especially dire. Rural health officials fear the staffing shortages could be exacerbated by healthcare vaccination mandates promised by President Joe Biden. Interesting. Which they say could cause a wave of resignations the hospitals cannot afford. Yes, but can I also suggest that having a staff that's unvaccinated is also something that the hospitals cannot afford, because everybody is going to die in them, including the nurses, and they'll just overwhelm themselves that much faster if the staff refuses to get vaccinated. So I don't know what to tell you. I mean, people keep saying that the The mandate is going to cost me my job. Economics is going to cost you your job. We can reduce it to the cold science of economics. At some point, the hard-pressed rural hospital, even before you get your COVID, is going to say, look, COVID is going to reap our nursing staff who refuses to get vaccinated. Not only is that going to swamp us and overwhelm us and compromise our ability to treat patients from the community who get COVID for the same reasons and show up here, but in the meantime, we're going to be having to pay for it all. Not only we're going to have to pay through the nose for traveling nurses who are vaccinated, for one thing, and they're going to be here taking care of our unvaccinated nurses who are now patients for another. But in addition, we keep talking about the high cost of medical care, et cetera, and particularly the high cost of caring for somebody who's 3 weeks in the ICU due to COVID, and insurance companies increasingly not covering that, particularly for people who don't even take the time to get vaccinated, right? Well, who's covering the insurance for these nurses that work for these hospitals? Well, the hospital is. The hospital's eventually going to say, I don't want to continue to pay the healthcare premiums for people who are virtually guaranteed to be struck down by COVID, whether it kills them or not. I have to pay for their treatment and hospitalization. And I'm not gonna anymore. Economics is firing you, not the mandate. The mandate is an economic reaction to the reality of the virus. It only makes sense. It's the cheapest way we have not to run into the mountain of problems, economic and health problems, that this virus causes, and you won't take it. Well, I can't kill you like the virus will, but I can cut you off economically, and I'm going to do it. Then you'll get killed by the virus. But, you'll be our problem only as a patient, not also as a cost center. It's just economics. It's going to happen. That's why it's happening. All right, so where were we? Rural health officials fear the staffing shortage could be exacerbated by the mandates, which they say could cause a wave of resignations. Oh, and then later deaths that the hospitals cannot afford. But they can cut their costs in half by saying, we can take care of patients. We're just not going to also pay for us to we're not going to pay ourselves to take care of you. Half of Scoggins staff, for example, is unvaccinated. So poof, there they go. You don't have a staff. If you're staffing a hospital and it's unvaccinated staff, you don't have a staff. It's ephemeral. When the time comes, poof, they're gone. They'll either resign on you or die in your hospital. That's the choice. Snyder warned that nursing shortages and their high associated costs will become unsustainable for rural hospitals operating on razor-thin margins. She predicted a new wave of rural hospital closures will further drive up the dire mortality numbers, and there'll be mortality numbers among unvaccinated nurses to boot. Staffing shortages already limit how many beds hospitals can use, Scoggins said. He estimated most hospitals in Texas, including his own, are operating at roughly 2/3 of their bed capacity. His emergency room is so swamped, he's had to send a few patients home to be monitored daily by an ambulance team, who surely has nothing else better to do, right? That's the end of the article. But there's more. Wait, but first, let's see. Some comments to pick up on. Ricky, hey, how you doing there in Kanakistan? How'd you enjoy the Memorial Day for the residential school victims? I understand, by the way, it was known in shorthand as Orange Shirt Day. I guess we were all supposed to wear orange shirts. I didn't get the message on that one until too late. But then I noticed that there was a discussion between Brian and Ricky. Neither of them have any orange shirts. Anyway, it's a specialty thing, orange shirts. And supplies are low due to supply chain problems due to COVID. I just thought I'd tell you that. But Ricky says, I live in mostly a rural area. It took a while for the virus to get here, but it eventually arrived. We also have 75% of the population fully vaccinated, and that makes a difference. Yeah, eventually it arrives. I don't know why people thought it wouldn't arrive, but again, that's the pan in pandemic. Not everybody knew that. It was a new word to a lot of people. All right. I mentioned that there was more, and there is, and we're coming up on the break, and I don't know if I'm going to read this whole thing because sometimes it's just too much or too frustrating or whatever, but big headline this morning in Politico. And I guess is it excerpted from her book? Because the headline, it's in Politico magazine. The byline is for Stephanie Grisham, whose tell-all book is out, and I think that's what she's doing. Yeah. And anyway, that's being published Tuesday, it says here in a little blurb describing who Stephanie Grisham is. So her latest shots at the Trump administration runs under the headline of how Jared and Ivanka hijacked the White House's COVID response. And it wasn't hard, I'm sure, because the idiot in charge at the time very largely was inclined to think, for the most part, just like Jared did, that this was going to be a blue state problem and that it actually would inure to their political advantage to let the virus run its course and kill all the blue state voters, except, again, not understanding the part of pandemic, they didn't realize that they were eventually going to be killing their own voters, their own people, as they put it. But of course, well, actually, it's interesting because all the decision makers are very definitely blue city, blue state, East Coast liberal enclave elites. Their friends and neighbors were going to be on hand to witness the devastation, though many of them, were able to isolate well enough that they saved themselves from the virus. But yeah, not exactly news that Jared Kushner was the chief advisor, the chief mullah for the Osama bin Laden of COVID, Donald Trump. But I guess she's got some details, as the subheader says, from inside the room, an inside the room account of the chaotic day Trump addressed the nation on the pandemic. I didn't learn a great deal in my quick skim of the article, but I wanted to make you aware that it was out there. Maybe we'll talk a little bit after the break about what beans she's spilling exactly, and then move on. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Ed Roots Radio. So this is a very long article / excerpt from the book, and it's a little self-serving, I'm sure, and I don't like Stephanie Grisham a whole lot. But it's an interesting description of the situation and deserves a little bit of attention anyway. But my quick skim of it was basically that it was chiefly focused on the decision to put Trump in front of the cameras and address the nation right at the beginning of the big pandemic. And that appearance was disjointed and, well, disheartening to the nation, I'm sure, to all people who saw that there was a very serious, globally serious situation facing us all, and we really needed competent government. And everybody at that point said, oh my God, Donald Trump is president. This is going to be terrible. And he's advised by terrible people who have terrible motives. And they're stupid and don't know what they're doing. And this is really not going to go well. And, it was all embodied in the fact that the president at the time, Donald Trump, gets on TV and gives a speech that evidences that he's got no idea what's going on. And this is the story of the provenance of that speech. And I guess Grisham is setting herself up as the sensible person in all of this who said, who tried to stop this from being such a disaster, but everyone overruled her. She was powerless as White House press secretary to do anything important. And she may have been, because this particular president had more than just terrible advisors. He had his children advising him, and he was inclined to listen to them even though they didn't have any experience in government and didn't know what they were doing. And apparently it is Grisham's contention that basically it's Ivanka saying, well, there's this major crisis. So what happens in a major crisis? I've seen this on TV before. The president addresses the nation. Daddy, you need to address the nation. And Ben gets around to, I guess, Stephanie Grisham saying, well, what do you have in mind? It's one thing to say there's a crisis, let's address the nation. But do you have something in mind to say that you think will help the nation at this moment? And they all look at her confused, like, what do you mean? It's a TV show. It's a reality show. It's a game. The president goes on TV and says something. well, what does he say? What should I write down for? I don't know. Presidents know what they're doing. Every time you see one on television, they say things that are sensible-ish and normal sounding. So get us one of those things and put that on the teleprompter and he'll say the thing. And that's basically how they ended up, not knowing what they were doing and showing their hand right away. Okay. Well, I mean, there's some interesting details. For instance, there's one moment where Trump says something really dumb. She's illustrating, the frequency with which he flippantly said dumb things in the office, right up top here. Where are we? And this will remind you very quickly that Stephanie Grisham is the one writing it. The opening of the article. The year 2020 started on a promising enough note for the president, at least considering we'd all endured the previous 3 years. The economy was good. Meh. The impeachment effort on Ukraine looked like a dud. That's actually a bad thing. And the polls were decent. And they were not. But Stephanie Grisham is a dope. Trump was, for the most part, in a good mood and, as always, up for chatting about anything under the sun. Once on Air Force One, I was sitting with him in his cabin, and for whatever reason, maybe he had just read something or seen his face on TV, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau popped into the president's head. So, again, the frivolousness of what goes on in Trump's head. There's a story that goes with it, and it's funny. But remember that this is her second Air Force One story. The first Air Force One story we heard about her was Trump called me from Air Force One to talk about his penis. Well, it's happening again. Trump looked at me and says, "Are you okay if I say this?" That was always a troubling question. Who knew what was going to come out of his mouth? Sure, I nodded. What does he want to say, right? And what he decided he wants to say, and I think he's just trying to get a rise out of her by saying something. Is it okay if I say this? And it's totally inappropriate. And big joke. But what did he want to do? He wanted to say, Trudeau's mom, she effed, and he uses the word, she effed all of the Rolling Stones. Is it okay if I say that? Parenthetically, in fact, Margaret Trudeau denied having affairs with any members of the Rolling Stones, but later said, I should have slept with every single one of them. Maybe, it's enclosed in quotes, maybe she said it, I don't care, who knows. Canadians, perhaps you remember. On another occasion around the new year, a young boy started publicly challenging Trump to go vegan in TV ads and on highway billboards. I have no recollection of this, but of course it penetrated the president's psyche, apparently. If the president agreed, the boy said, the charity he represented would donate $1 million to veterans. I was communications director at the time, and I playfully asked the president if he would ever consider doing that, since the challenge would raise a lot of money for a good cause. I knew he loved his steaks and cheeseburgers, but 1 month didn't seem that long. By the way, it is, if you ever try to go vegan or help somebody else with experimenting with a vegan diet. Anyway, Trump's response was swift, and his tone was suddenly very serious. So this is the only thing where he's had a swift and serious response to anything that was worth a damn. And it was about whether or not he should take the 1 month vegan challenge. But listen to the way he says it. No. It messes with your body chemistry, your brain, he said, offering his views on vegetarian diets. And if I lose even one brain cell, we're effed. The country is effed. If I lose even one brain, because my brain is so important to this country. No president's brain has ever been less important to the country. And we've had some terrible things happen to presidents' brains in this country. Many of, in some cases, so traumatically injured that they died by assassinations. But Trump is sure that his individual brain cells, not only would they be killed by a vegan diet, I don't know, but the country was screwed if even one billionth of the great Trump brain died. Even though, you know what? You lose brain cells every day. People do. That's the way cells work. But he doesn't know that because so many of his brain cells are dead. Whatever. Anyway, that isn't the chief aim of the story, but that's kind of where he is, where the scene setter. Then this is the genius that then has to go out and decide, gosh, how do I confront a global pandemic? And like I said, the basics of the story without getting into the details of it. You can read the thing over the weekend if you want. Are that they really had no idea what they were doing, and all they were interested in was the optics of going on TV. And I don't think they even get into the discussion of, there's other articles discuss Jared's proclivity for advising Trump to do little to nothing about confronting the virus because it would only kill people in blue states. But they're gassing their own people. We've had regime change in other countries advocated for intentionally killing your own people, and that's what they're doing, and now really even concentrating on their own voters among their own people at that. All right. Other news, other tidbits, things that need to be discussed or brought to your attention before the weekend. I don't know what. I was going to say before the weekend intervenes, but, I think we're all looking forward to the weekend. All right. Things 3 to talk about over the weekend. Alex Jones, worst person in the world, has lost his lawsuits, or 2 of the Sandy Hook lawsuits. This story broke last night. Sebastian Murdoch at HuffPost has written it up, and it's a pretty good view of what's going on here. Alex Jones just lost 2 Sandy Hook cases, subheader. A judge issued default judgments, a rarity in the legal world, against Jones and InfoWars after the conspiracy theorist failed to produce discovery records. If we have to, long story short here, he's being sued. The suit goes into discovery. The 2 sides, can demand documents and records from one another in order to help flesh out the record for trial. Basically, Alex Jones, is an idiot and a conspiracy theorist and a kook, and thinks he can do whatever he wants, and there's nobody that can touch him because he'll, if the law comes to get me, I'll just punch him in the face, and then that'll be it. But, hauled into a courtroom where you can really do things to people and really hold them accountable for money or for their freedom in the case of a criminal trial, you lose because that doesn't work. So default judgment, basically they had the discovery phase. They subpoenaed Jones and his organization and InfoWars for his records, and he just said, I'm just not giving them to you. And that's a thing that you can try and get away with when you're the president of the United States and there's a belief among the Justice Department that they're not allowed to arrest you while you're president of the United States, no matter what you do. But Alex Jones isn't president of the United States. So what basically happens there is if you don't comply with subpoenas during discovery, the court says, well, one of the penalties we can impose on you for refusing to comply is we simply declare you to have lost your lawsuit. And we're going to do that unless you deliver up the papers. Baloney, you're not going to do that to me. Yes, we will. Didn't deliver the papers. Bam, you lost your lawsuit. You're now liable for the amount for which the other side sued you. And we're going to enter into the penalty phase. And the jury is going to have to sit down and decide how much do you have to pay the families you harassed after the Sandy Hook massacre. And I suppose it might be a very large amount of money. Basically whatever they can get their hands on over there. And of course, then they'll enter a new phase with his non-compliance in delivering those things up. So we're going to end up seizing his assets and liquidating them and selling them off. And if we're lucky, Jones will fight during the seizure and then be killed by the marshals. So we'll see how that goes. Here's the real news, though. Why speculate? InfoWars host Alex Jones has lost 2 of several lawsuits filed against him by relatives of Sandy Hook victims after he routinely failed to comply with requests to produce documents related to his involvement in spreading lies about the deadly shooting. That, of course, is the real basis of the lawsuit. You all know what that's about, I think, right? That basically families of victims of the Sandy Hook shooting have been harassed for years. The graves of their children, by the way, the gravestones have been desecrated by lunatics encouraged by Alex Jones to believe that the whole thing was a hoax. And now they're suing him for doing that. And he lost because he's also an idiot and refuses to hand over the records that were being demanded. Now, by the way, the records being demanded would probably have demonstrated his liability for it, and he would have ended up losing the lawsuit anyway. But losing it by default is particularly crazy and dumb. Judge Maya Guerra Gamble on Monday issued her ruling for default judgments against Jones, in 2 different cases, which means he and the conspiracy theory spewing outlet InfoWars have been found liable for all damages, and a jury will now be convened to determine how much he will owe the plaintiffs. The new rulings become public Thursday. A default judgment, essentially, by the way, you hear the phrase being thrown about all the time. I'll have my day in court, or I'll see you in court. But I'll have my day in court. I can make my case in court. You get a default judgment against you basically when you refuse to go and make that case. And basically the judge is saying, we are legally entitled by the fact that you refuse to engage in the discovery process and or, didn't show up for trial if it came to that later on down the road. But if you're not going to participate, then the court is entitled to say, well, we find in the absence of any cooperation from the defendant and the absence of any willingness to engage in the process and present your own story, we have no choice but to accept at face value the story that the plaintiff tells. So you just lost your case. I mean, the plaintiff told their story and said you did these things, and you told us nothing. So there's no other possible conclusion. No jury could possibly legally reach a different conclusion but that you are liable, and so therefore default judgment. In the filings, Gamble eviscerated Jones and reasoned that default judgments should be ordered because, quote, an escalating series of judicial admonishments, monetary penalties, and non-dispositive sanctions have all been ineffective at deterring the abuse caused by Jones's unwillingness to turn over documents related to the cases, the Texas judge ruled. Texas, I had no idea. The ruling, which is often referred to in Texas as a death penalty sanction for a party unwilling to comply with court orders, is a rarity in the legal world. Jones, who is now on his 7th lawyer in these cases, and you can see why, had years to provide documentation requested by the court, including internal company emails. HuffPost was the first to report the start of Jones's Sandy Hook legal woes in 2018, when parents Leonard Posner and Veronique, I don't know, Veronique is Veronica, but Veronique de la Rosa filed a defamation lawsuit related to Jones's continued lies that the 2012 school shooting that left 20 children and 6 adults dead was a false flag hoax filled with crisis actors. Posner and De La Rosa's 6-year-old son Noah was killed in the shooting. In the years since, the parents have dealt with continued harassment from those who followed Jones's lead and claimed the shooting was fake. They're not the only ones. In total, 9 families who lost loved ones in the Sandy Hook shooting have leveled lawsuits against Jones and InfoWars for the damage he and his outlet caused. Since then, Jones has lost multiple legal battles in his many lawsuits and was ordered to pay nearly $150,000 in legal fees in 2020 for failing to provide discovery documents to the plaintiff. It was Jones's continued refusal to hand over discovery documents that led to Monday's rulings against him in a lawsuit brought on by Posner and a separate lawsuit by parent Scarlett Lewis, whose 6-year-old son Jesse was also killed in the shooting. Posner, De La Rosa, and Lewis are being represented by Texas law firm Farrar and Ball, who told HuffPost that they are, quote, not surprised by the court's decision. How could you be surprised by this? Jones's most recent lawyer, Brad Reeves, told the Austin American-Statesman earlier this month that a default judgment against Jones would be a, quote, hugely excessive response to his discovery failures. Judge Gamble felt otherwise. Brad Reeves rings a... I'm just curious. I don't know whether I'm making this up in my mind. But, yeah, Brad Reeves. I'm just curious. For some reason, I remember... No, I mean, I don't think it's him. I just want to take a look at the picture. But I feel like we've run into him in a story in the past. But there was also another Texas state legislator who was an attorney who, remember, he was going to like barnstorm around the country filing suits over the election. And he was a real weird, geeky looking dude with a gigantic cowboy hat who looked really out of place in a gigantic cowboy hat. But I don't think that's Brad Reeves. Anyway, Judge Gamble, disagrees and felt otherwise. Furthermore, she writes, in considering whether lesser remedies would be effective. This court has also considered defendants' general bad faith approach to litigation, Mr. Jones's public threats, and Mr. Jones's professed belief that these proceedings are show trials, the court rulings read. Lawyer Bill Ogden with Farrar and Ball told HuffPost that Gamble's default judgment ruling is a bit of a myth in the legal world. We learn about death penalty sanctions in law school as more of a theory, and it's almost unheard of to have them handed down in a case like this, Ogden said in an emailed statement. However, the Sandy Hook cases are unique. It is extremely rare that a party, like Alex Jones and InfoWars, in this case, is ordered by the court to comply with discovery, is sanctioned for failing to obey the court's multiple orders, and then continues to blatantly disregard the court's authority by continuously refusing to comply. So what he's saying here is it's a bit of a myth in that basically no one ever has this imposed on them in this fashion because, you don't just refuse to engage in the court. I mean, Saddam Hussein, refused to recognize the validity of the court that was trying him after the Iraq War. But you're not really allowed to do that. And hardly anybody really does. They just hire lawyers and they fight things out the best they can and put up the best defense they can. He did nothing. And that's rare. But that's the ultimate outcome of something like that. You just don't see it a lot. So that's funny. They think of it as a sort of an urban myth. But it can happen. While Jones has now claimed he no longer believes the Sandy Hook shooting was a hoax, the damage had already been done. In 2017, Florida woman, Lucy Richards, was sentenced to 5 months in prison for sending threats to Posner. What threats? You gonna die, Richards told Posner in one recorded voicemail message. Death is coming to you real soon. Nice thing to say to a family that already lost a child in this. As part of her sentence, Richards was ordered not to access InfoWars. That's funny. Jones's cataclysmic court losses are unsurprising to those who have followed his cases. In a 2019 deposition, Jones was unable to recall basic facts about the school shooting, including the date that it happened, which is kind of a big deal. It's December 14th. I talk 4 hours a day, and I can't remember what I talked about sometimes a week ago, Jones said in the deposition. Now, I can get with that. That I am sympathetic with. I don't know anything about that either, but I do know the date. Reached by phone on Thursday, Jones's lawyer, Reeves, told HuffPost that he had no comment regarding the decision. I haven't really analyzed the ruling, so I don't know exactly what's going to happen, Reeves said. So, in addition to Jones ignoring the courts, Jones's lawyer was also ignoring the courts. So that really wasn't going to end well. And I'm glad it didn't, because no one deserves it more, quite honestly. So, anyway, that's a big piece of news. Wanted to catch you up on that one. Not really sure what else to share with you that's in terms of the highest value on all these things. But I got a number of stories, so I'm going to hit them all as quickly as I can. How about this one? It turns out that Pillow Guy, Mike Lindell, has somehow convinced the Republicans in Idaho that they need to do a fake audit of some of the vote in Idaho as well. I mean, I imagine he's trying this in every state, but Idaho just happened to be the first one to comply. He paid them, I guess, to do a recanvass of some of the vote. Although I guess he paid for it, but this headline at TPM gives a slightly different spin to things. It says, Idaho's Secretary of State physically recounted the vote to prove Mike Lindell wrong. But as it turns out, Lindell's still not convinced. So this one here, oh yeah, right. And I could read it yesterday, but today I can't, whatever. I guess I can read it in pocket. So that's good. Matt Shuham writing for TPM. The earlier reports of it made it sound like Lindell came up with the money and paid, and Idaho willingly recounted the vote in 2 counties or something like that. But now it's starting to sound like maybe the officials there were saying, well, if you'll pay for it, I'll count it, but I'm counting it to prove you wrong. Mike Lindell, the pillow magnate who's sunk months and millions of dollars into pushing the false claim that the 2020 election was stolen, is now officially a thorn in the side of multiple Republican secretaries of state. Earlier this month, Lindell met for a friendly meeting and photo op with Alabama's Republican Secretary of State and Governor before announcing on his television show, which I didn't know he had, his belief that actually 100,000 voters in the state had been flipped. Votes had been flipped, leaving Secretary of State John Merrill scrambling to correct the record. Wait a minute, you're saying that I can't administer elections correctly, and I can. And interestingly, right, Alabama, like, Trump won it, right? So if 100,000 votes were flipped, I mean, I guess it could prove your theory of vote flipping correct if you could, for instance, say, oh, I don't know, prove your theory of vote flipping. That's a major step forward in proving your theory. If you were to prove your theory, you would have proven your theory. But Idaho also, I think, went for Trump. So, like, what's the point? But anyway, now in response to separate Lindell allegations, Idaho's Republican Secretary of State has sent teams to physically recount the vote totals in two small counties. Both times, by the way, reaffirming the official winner, and is scheduled to recount certain precincts in a third county this weekend. If Joan were here, I would ask you, did Trump lose any county in Idaho? What would you be recounting for? Oh, and the answer is Mike Lindell is a former crackhead and maybe back on the crack and is just a stupid idiot and doesn't know what he's doing. Now, okay, fine, whatever. Of course, the recounts have not found any evidence of votes flipped, as Lindell claimed. Informed of the results over the phone Thursday by TPM, the deep-pocketed betting entrepreneur wasn't convinced. And by the way, please keep doing it and have less deep pockets. I guess burn all your money if you want. Now, is there a chance that this number was extrapolated for this particular county would be wrong? What? Now, is there a chance that this number that was extrapolated for this particular county would be wrong? He asked, referring to his assertions about Butte County. We are saying that right? It's not Butte County, obviously. Butte County, one of the counties reviewed by Idaho Secretary of State Lawrence Denny's office. It's never happened before, but I'm not saying it's impossible for one to be off. What? In a press release, Denny's office said they picked Butte and another county, Camas, C-A-M-A-S, I don't know, to recount after learning that Lindell had alleged statewide manipulation of Idaho's election results. But he won. Once we had the document in hand, we immediately believed there was something amiss, Chief Deputy Secretary Chad Houck, H-O-U-C-K, said. This document alleged electronic manipulation in all 44 counties. At least 7 Idaho counties have no electronic steps in their vote counting process. Butte and Camas are tiny counties, meaning recounting them was quick. The entire process for each county was recorded and posted on YouTube. Fake, false flag, crisis actors. In Butte, the original official canvass showed 1,202 votes for Trump and 188 for Biden. Recount! I demand a recount. But you won. I don't care. Lindell asserted that Trump really won by a count of 1,260 to 130 and cited complex mathematical formulas and web traffic. The official result, he said, reflected 116 flipped votes to no avail, but that's what he says. But the recount, the results of which were announced on Wednesday, found 1,193 votes for Trump and 188 for Biden. So they were dead on for Biden, 188, just like they said, but 9 votes too high for Trump. The 9 votes that Trump lost, the Secretary of State said, was likely attributed to the thermal printed ballots that come from assisted voter terminals, which are the same size as the absentee envelopes contained in the same storage boxes. What does that mean? In Camas County, the original canvass showed Trump winning 507 to 149. That's the whole county, by the way. And they get just as much representation as you do. The recount showed a 1-vote difference, with Trump winning 508 to 149. He found an extra vote for Trump. So, aha! Told you he was being cheated. This human error of 0.14%, and that's actually a large number because there's no votes in that count. There's 656 votes cast in the whole thing. 657 now they found. So that can one vote equals 0.14%. That's actually pretty huge. But anyway, could have been in our own process or on election day. Not sure which, but either way, didn't make a difference, and he burned his money. Hooray! Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, where were we? We're in the middle of this Mike Lindell debacle. I guess what makes it even more annoying and stupid is not just did Mike Lindell say, well, I allege fraud, generally speaking, but he came to them, and I guess this is what motivated them to prove him wrong. He came to them with a spreadsheet, essentially, as what they refer to as the big lie spreadsheet, and said, I know exactly how many votes were flipped in these counties. And that one county that found one additional vote, Camas County, found one additional vote for Trump. Yes, as I said, a human error of 0.14%. Could have been, they're not sure whether it was on election day that they got the number wrong or in the recanvass that they got the number wrong. But one of the two is wrong. But more importantly, Hoke here says, well, it was well short of the supposed 54 vote difference alleged by the big lie spreadsheet. Lindell came to them with numbers and said, I know for a fact that in Camas County, 54 votes were counted incorrectly, were flipped from Trump to Biden. And I know that X number in this county and that county, and they counted, and they're like, well, there was one, and it wasn't flipped from Trump to Biden. It just wasn't counted for Trump on the original election day count and then the canvass afterwards for some reason. But it didn't make a difference in the outcome, either in the county or in the state, and it isn't 54. But Lindell just says, well, how do we know that it wasn't 54? Well, because we counted again. Well, how do we know that you're not counting corruptly? Well, you don't. But, what are you going to do? Here's the ballots. There's only 560 of them here. It's not that hard. And we videotaped ourselves counting them. To which I'm sure Lindell says, well, some of them were printed in China and they're not real ballots. And I see that whatever was there, you counted correctly. But was what was there the actual ballots? Was it something from outer space or inside one of my pillows? And, what do you do with something like that? You just say, shut the hell up. Get out of here. Lindell informed that each one of the county's ballots had been individually recounted during a visit from the Secretary of State's office in front of observers from both the Democratic and Republican parties was incredulous. When they say they're hand counting, are they looking at the actual person's vote? He asked. It's on videotape. You can take a look. Before suggesting that the ballots could be counterfeit or cast on behalf of dead voters or people who've moved. It's more than just counting, he said, adding later, the ballots themselves are not real people. He wants the 560 voters of, Camas County, assembled in a gym somewhere for him to personally question them and see whether, in fact, among the 560 or so who gather, 508 of them voted for Trump and 149 of them voted for Biden. But then that's not a canvass, and it's also not a secret ballot, and it's also incredibly stupid, and you should, in fact, get the hell out of here or go fall down a well somewhere, something. All right. The Idaho Secretary of State's office did not immediately return TPM's request for comment. Separately, Lindell falsely claimed that 175,000 votes had been flipped in Maricopa County, Arizona, the scene of the GOP's flagship sham fake audit. Even the Trump-friendly auditors there did not make that claim. Like other prominent voices pushing falsehoods about the 2020 election, such as ex-Overstock.com CEO Patrick Byrne, who fundraised millions of dollars for the Maricopa County audit, and all got burned, Lindell's wealth and large platform have made him a political force in his own right. In August, Lindell hosted a cyber symposium in Sioux Falls where he promised to present evidence in the form of snapshots of internet traffic that Chinese hackers had stolen the election for Joe Biden. Dozens of elected officials from around the country attended, but no such evidence was presented to the group. Weird. Lindell told TPM Thursday that he'd visited with state officials from Missouri, Florida, Wisconsin, Arizona, Texas, Ohio, Pennsylvania. Not necessarily secretaries of state, though, he noted. He also said he planned to return to Alabama to meet again with Secretary of State John Merrill and his team. Lindell said he spent $30,000 to purchase a copy of the state's voter rolls to analyze, and that he'd return soon to present his team's findings. He said to come back, Lindell recalled. I said, we're going to come back and show you everything. By which he means probably take his pants off, but whatever. There's a rich, crazy person who wants to go around making an idiot of himself, and I guess there's nothing you can do to stop him for the time being. All right, other big stories are out there worth spending a little bit of time on, at least. Let's see. Where do we go with this? This is an interesting, small-ish story, just sort of reaffirming things I've told you in the past about lawmakers and leadership PACs. The Hill reports lawmakers using leadership PACs as, quote, slush funds to live lavish lifestyles, according to a report. Carl Evers Hillstrom reports this one for The Hill. I've told you about this, and we spent a long time on the way Rick Santorum, in particular, used to use his leadership PAC as a slush fund. So does Newt Gingrich, and still does. It still exists, and he still uses it to pay his way around the country, I think. Lots of members doing that. Lots of members using leadership PACs for the purposes for which they were intended, of course, running for leadership positions. We've spent a lot of time on that, too. But, The Hill, I'm sure, has reported on this before, which is probably how I know so much about this stuff. But they're making like it's a new story. But I think it's interesting because it reaffirms what we've been telling you, mostly anecdotally, over the years since we did the granular look at Rick Santorum's purchase of Starbucks and Arby's with his leadership PAC. Members of Congress are using their leadership PACs as slush funds to live lavish lifestyles bankrolled by corporate PACs and business executives, according to a new report from Issue 1 and the Campaign Legal Center. By the way, I guess there are little bones you could pick with the way the study is portrayed here. We'd really have to read the study and see what their analysis was. I'll bring that up as we get down there. 92% of lawmakers have leadership PACs. I did not know that. Which are separate from their campaign accounts and aren't subject to the same restrictions on how donors' money can be spent. The report found that in the 116th Congress, 120 leadership PACs spent less than 50% of their money on politics, with the rest going to things like meals at upscale restaurants and stays at elite resorts. Those PACs together spent more than $2 million at hotels and resorts, $220,000 at sporting events and concerts, $190,000 at ski resorts, and $150,000 at steakhouses. Now, before we go too much further into this, I will say I have no doubt but that does happen, and probably a lot. And maybe even it's the main use of leadership PACs, given how few of those people can be in leadership. They want to be in leadership, but they're not there yet. On the other hand, I would caution this. I don't know what it means to say we've spent $2 million. I understand the leadership PACs together all spend $2 million at hotels and resorts. Very often at hotels and resorts, that's where you might hold a fundraiser, either for your leadership PAC or someone else or whatever. Very often hotels and resorts are where fundraisers are held for the members that you are trying to help raise money for as part of your effort with your leadership PAC. And your leadership PAC will cover your stay at the Four Seasons, because that's where the fundraiser is for Joe Schmo, who you're trying to get elected or reelected to Congress so that he'll vote for you in a leadership race later on. And I mean, I guess that's kind of a quasi-legitimate expense. On the other hand, yeah, you can also do things like, well, I need to go to, wherever to do a fundraiser for Joe Schmo. The Joe Schmo fundraiser is at the Holiday Inn across town, but I'm not staying there. I'm going to stay at the Four Seasons in the big city nearby and get a limo back and forth. But it's for the purpose of showing up at his fundraiser. Less legitimate. But there you have it. Or, I'm attending a conference of Republican leaders, because only the Republicans would do this. But, of course not. But, I'm attending a conference, and the conference is at the Four Seasons, and I'm going to pay my ticket with my leadership pack. There, sometimes there's a partial excuse for this. And sometimes they just want to go skiing. That's true. Eating Arby's, whatever. The figures suggest that a large number of lawmakers are not using leadership PACs for their stated purpose, to raise money for their party and their fellow lawmakers seeking re-election, which some people think is illegitimate in the first place anyway, and instead are using them to live large on their donors' dime. Leadership PACs represent the worst of pay-to-play political giving, Issue 1 CEO Nick Penniman said in a statement. People of conscience in Congress and at the Federal Election Commission must rein in the abuse of leadership PACs and prohibit leadership PACs from being slush funds for politicians to pursue lavish lifestyles. Here's some examples, I guess. Senator Rand Paul, clearly guilty. His leadership PAC spent 12% of its $1 million haul on politics, the smallest percentage among senators, shelling out $1,900 at a 5-star resort in Palm Beach, Florida, and $1,500 at Maryland's top-rated resort, according to the report. 2 leadership PACs controlled by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York spent a combined $1.9 million, but just 1/4 went to political activities, according to the report. And again, it depends on how you define those things. The PAC spent $7,800 at a 5-star New York City hotel and $2,100 at the 5-star Viceroy L'Hermitage in Beverly Hills, which calls itself the epitome of Hollywood glamour. Why was she there? What was going on there? I don't know. Maybe nothing. Senator Ted Cruz spent 18% of his PAC's $2.2 million on political activities, including spending $12,000 on Houston Astros games and $5,000 at the Cloister at Sea Island, Georgia's top-rated luxury hotel, the report found. The Hill has reached out to those lawmakers for comment. Cruz spokesperson said the senator's leadership PAC is raising significant amounts of money to make contributions to candidates and invest heavily in advertisements and messaging that empower and help give voice to the conservative movement. A large chunk of leadership PAC's fundraising comes from corporate PACs, which are controlled by company lobbyists seeking to influence lawmakers. In many cases, those donations directly fund politicians' lavish lifestyles. Politicians have defended their leadership PAC spending, stating that their stays at pricey hotels and resorts are used to facilitate fundraisers, with big-dollar campaign donors who expect a luxurious venue. Lawmakers are prohibited by law from using campaign funds to enrich themselves or bankroll their personal vacations. However, the FEC has not said that the personal use rule applies to leadership PACs. A bipartisan group of lawmakers led by Representatives Kathleen Rice, Mike Gallagher, and Derek Kilmer proposed legislation to clarify that leadership PACs cannot be used for personal use, a measure that didn't gain momentum last Congress. Just thought I'd bring you up to speed with that one and remind you of what we've had to say about leadership PACs in the past. Let's see. What else? Some interesting analysis of last night's non-vote, anyway, that I think is still accessible through TPM. Josh Marshall just sort of analyzing what was going on and giving kudos, I think, to Pramila Jayapal for her deft stewardship of the Progressive Caucus. What was the part of his observation that I thought was interesting? Is it back down here at the bottom? Oh, yes, right. Noting here that progressives hung tough, but in fact, the party leaders were passively supporting their defiance, maybe more than passively, and that there's no other way to read the refusal to whip the votes and then, in fact, hold the vote last night. I mentioned to you that Jim Clyburn was saying he was still possibly trying to figure out how the vote was going to go, even at the congressional baseball game on Wednesday night. But more to the point here, Jim Clyburn was asked repeatedly, are you whipping votes on the infrastructure bill? And he kept saying, no, not yet, no, not yet, no, not yet. And in fact, hasn't done so to date. And Josh is pointing out here, when you see the leadership not whipping the votes, they're counting, but not pressuring people to vote one way or the other. That's a interesting signal. It's a tacit implication from the leadership that they aren't trying to strong-arm progressives back behind the bill for the sake of having a W on the record. So that's a tacit nod to their position and saying we kind of support you in what you're doing here. This is the way we want the game to go. So we happen to be on the same page. And that's what makes everybody so angry about the stupid Democrats in disarray headlines, like another that Rebecca Romans sent our way from earlier today. Where did that one go? She was just, expressing her annoyance over this one. Oh, yeah, right. The David Rothkopf thread and article, I guess, or just a thread, right? Rothkopf writing, the New York Times does it again. House, this is their headline, House delays vote on infrastructure bill as Democrats feud. On the homepage, they call it a, quote, big setback for the Biden agenda. Really? A couple of days? The media is getting the story 100% wrong. And, other people noting, by the way, 96% of the Democrats on Capitol Hill are in agreement on both what to do with both the infrastructure bill and the reconciliation bill. It's like 4 people who are standing in the way of the reconciliation bill. It's not a party unity thing. It's like 4 guys. 1, 2, 3 guys and 1 woman, I guess. How many? Maybe I don't even know if I'm counting the guys right. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. But yes, they insist on it being a Dems in disarray story, and Dems have rarely been so well arrayed. So it's kind of dumb to say this. But no, it's not going to stop them. All right, let's see. Other things worth taking a quick look at. Gosh, there's all right, let's see. All right, how are we going to do it? I will note for the record, but not read the story because it'll take forever. Charlie Savage and Adam Goldman at the New York Times have an article that I think you might want to spend a little bit of time on, just reviewing over the weekend. Trump server mystery produces fresh conflict. You remember I told you last week, at the end of the week, I think, about, what's his name? John Danforth, is it, right? Danforth, Durham. I'm confusing him with the old Attorney General, right? Anyway, I even got that right. Who cares? It's John Durham, the former Connecticut U.S. attorney who got picked by Bill Barr to investigate the origins of the Trump-Russia investigation, to demonstrate once and for all that it was all a big lie and a big hoax and a political hit job, and then he couldn't do that, and then he brought some sort of strange lying to investigators charge against one of the lawyers who brought up the Alpha Bank server thing. And I guess Charlie Savage and Adam Goldman now say something weird is going on with this too. A recent indictment suggested that researchers who found strange internet links between a Russian bank and the Trump organization did not really believe their own work. But they're pushing back. And Charlie Savage and Adam Goldman talk to them and see if they can't shed some light on exactly what's going on here. I think it ends up only making John Durham's case look that much dumber and weaker. And if you're interested, you might want to take a look at that. But for purposes of the radio show, there's some other things I thought you might be interested in. I actually thought at the beginning of the day, I'm going to read that We Could Have Been Canada article because it really was fascinating, but I just can't spend the time on it on the air. But I emphasize that you should look at it. It's a really good, I just think it's an interesting view of history and a good reminder that, you probably learned in American history in high school that what was it? Something Greg said yesterday about, the voters being divided, into thirds roughly in one state or another. It's in Arizona, a third Democrats and one third Republicans and one third independents. And it brought to mind, because we were talking about Revolutionary War type stuff and the founding era. And I remember always learning that Americans were divided roughly into thirds at the time of the revolution. Well, only about 1/3 of them in support of independence from Britain, 1/3 Tories who thought the whole thing was treason, and 1/3 who basically didn't care one way or the other and just wanted to be left alone. Interesting. So, the mythology of the founding era is important to identify and debunk when necessary. All right, total shift of focus from that to back to supply chain issues. I saw a tweet the other day that caught my eye, and I want to find it again and cite it, but then read from a different source, mostly because the article that's linked makes it impossible because it's firewalled. But where was it? Yesterday I saw Matt Stoller. Remember Matt Stoller? I read a little less Matt Stoller these days, but that's okay. He's still hard at work at all the things that interest Matt Stoller. But the thing that I noticed he was saying brought up some interesting supply chain things. And I was immediately, intrigued, but then immediately turned back off again because most of the thread was about how he's the only one who knows that supply chain issues are becoming a problem, and that's amazing. Okay, well, I think a lot of us probably imagined this. And by the way, it struck me as I was thinking about that and the article that I did get to read, that one of the original warnings about pandemic anything, but at the time it was pandemic flu that we were talking about, that I gleaned from Greg's interest in and preparation for pandemic illness, was that supply chain issues were going to play a large part. That's one of the chief worries of a pandemic situation. The things you don't see coming. Everyone anticipates illness. Everyone anticipates difficulties in accessing adequate health care or hospital beds, but very few people anticipate the downstream effects of lots of people getting sick all at once and sometimes for extended periods of time, or having to lock down in order to avoid doing that, is that means that people aren't on the job elsewhere, and it creates supply chain problems. We weren't talking about it in terms of consumer supplies so much as larger threats to, American infrastructure, like what happens when everybody at the water treatment plant is too sick to work and households aren't getting clean water while they're locked down and in isolation trying to stay healthy, and then the very thing that keeps them healthy isn't coming free, not free, well, in Iceland, yes, but not here, but isn't showing up at the taps. Or garbage isn't being collected because all the sanitation engineers are sick, much less all the hospital problems. Milk isn't being delivered because the truckers are sick, et cetera, et cetera. The downstream effects, that seems to me, in hindsight, thinking back to the things Greg talked about in pandemic flu prep back in the early 2000s, yeah. So, I don't know. Eat it, Matt Stoller. I don't know. I'm not really that upset about it. But anyway, he was pointing to a different problem. Now I can't find the tweet, so it doesn't really matter. He was then pointing to a Boston Globe story about a anecdote from out of Alabama, where in Alabama, hard hit though they were by the virus, schools are open, but they were considering closing the schools and going back to remote learning nonetheless. Why? Not the virus, but rather because they were having difficulty keeping themselves supplied for school lunches that they were serving. They were running out of food and I guess other supplies that go along that are ancillary to the food service, and they were going to close down so that the kids stayed home and ate what they had at home, and they would no longer be responsible for feeding the kids because they couldn't get a hold of the supplies. I don't know if that's a great answer, because if there's a general shortage of food and or food service supplies, then people are going to have difficulty getting them as individuals and as families as well, and the kids will just starve at home. It just won't be the Alabama schools' problem that they're starving. They won't be responsible for the starvation. It'll be the individual parents. Hooray for individual responsibility in this country. It might make more sense if there were severe shortages to sort of centralize the feeding operation, and whatever food you can get a hold of, you'll distribute as equitably as possible. But that would never occur to anybody in Alabama, I'm sure, in public positions of power. There are lots of geniuses in Alabama to whom this would occur very naturally, but they don't have the hands on the levers of power very often. Anyway, different story. Like I said, it was written up in the Boston Globe and I didn't have access to it. So doesn't matter. I've got one from WTOP, the news radio channel around here in the Washington area, because it's happening in the Washington area too. Slightly different angle on it. Citing supply chain shortages, free suppers end in Prince George's County public schools. This will very shortly be turned to an attack on Biden, by the way, and you'll see how when we read through the story. Prince George's County public schools, that's suburban Maryland, says it will stop handing out free suppers to some students starting next week, citing supply chain issues and national shortages. Students enrolled in before and after school enrichment programs will continue to receive supper, but all other students will lose access, according to the school system, which notified parents of the move in a newsletter and by a robocall in April. And this is where the attack will come. The U.S. Department of Agriculture approved a plan to extend free meals at schools throughout the country through the end of the 2021-2022 school year amid the disruption of the coronavirus pandemic. With meals being free for all students nationwide, increased demand has placed a strain on food companies. School spokeswoman Megan, what is his last name? Gebrselassie. Oh, I think that's not too bad. Gebrselassie, told WTOP in an email. The number of students who will no longer get free supper is unclear, but Gebrselassie said roughly 36,631 suppers have been passed out each day so far this school year. Now that'll become an attack on Biden. He made them free, and of course they ran out of supplies because look what's going to happen. Everybody's going to take them, and yada, yada. Oh, no. Kids are taking yummy, yummy school food with them. They must be freeloaders who are reselling it on the black market for gourmet goods. Now, it's not really that great, for one thing. And yeah. Oh, no. This is the new Republican outrage, too. They're complaining about these free lunches and free dinners because it creates an entitlement mentality among kids, and they're going to think everything's free. There's no such thing as a free lunch, we tell them, and then they take those lunches for free. Of course, the school is free, and it hasn't caused them to think differently about school yet, but I imagine we'll take these problems on one at a time. Anyway, while free breakfast and lunch service will continue in schools, along with weekly meal distribution for virtual learning students, families should anticipate some menu changes as the school's nutrition team, quote, explores different options and meal substitutions in light of the supply shortage. About 3 weeks into the school year, the school system received notification from their distributors, brokers, and manufacturers that they're unable to fill our orders. Factory closures during the pandemic last year, coupled with staff shortages, and those people who died, mean it will take some time for the industry to return to normal production. Though it's unclear if other school districts in the D.C. region are also experiencing issues, Prince George's County isn't alone in struggling to feed students in their schools amid supply issues. Nationwide, schools are facing challenges feeding students, CNN reported. One school in Missouri was forced to send staff to local grocery stores to stock up on frozen pizza. Well, I imagine tater tots, although it says here tater toes. Do we think that we're now calling them tater toes? They are sort of toe-shaped. I don't think that's what's happening, though. And hot dogs. After 3 of their distributors stopped delivering food, the New York Times reported. There's lots more about this in this article. And as I mentioned, the Boston Globe article, I think I'll try and dig it up, is a more dire picture of what's going on. But of course, it's going to be more dire because it's happening in Alabama. And we started the show on that note, that things are going poorly in rural areas for a number of reasons. And that crisis has been a long time in coming and a long time in developing. And it'll take a long time to clear up as well. All right, I think we put together a relatively good hodgepodge for you today. There's lots more still to discuss next week, but we'll take the weekend to regroup, figure out what else is going on, and there's the Matt Stoller tweet. I found that, and let's see. Oh, yes, one more thing, by the way. Give you just a headline here from NPR. After 25 years in the dark, the CDC wants to study the true toll of guns in America. Now it might be possible, finally, for the CDC to study guns as a public health problem, something that's been prohibited to them up until this point. Now, of course, time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. What's he got on his plate? Let's find out. Democrats and Republicans cannot be covered the same because Republicans have overwhelmed the media with so much corruption, they have created scandal fatigue. Sounds real.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
House Republicans tried to block the IRS from catching wealthy tax cheats. We should means test that, by the way. GOP lawmakers fight vaccine efforts with dubious natural immunity claims and more Republican priming. Arch-conservative Star Chamber Justice Sam Alito argued that the shadow docket is not some sinister act to destroy democracy.